Okay, today we're going to talk about how to bring your model from Mudbox into Maya this one last time for rendering. So let's make sure to open up Maya and make sure that when you go to the project window that it's going to the right folder here, so your project is set. And let's open up Mudbox and open up our detailed model here. So opening this up, this is a pretty fun step in the process as far as I'm concerned, I feel like, because this is where all this hard work starts to pay off. And I personally just really enjoy taking a finished model and lighting it in Maya and kind of staging it. I find it to be a pretty rewarding process once we kind of get through these technical steps. And just keep in mind too that we're modeling a tree here, and in my specific instance, this is like a, like a stump here. But this technique that I'm showing is it's applicable to any kind of organic object. So this could be a character, a monster. It's just any kind of video game creature. It's just the sky's the limit here using this technique in terms of what you can do with organic modeling. So just kind of keep that in mind. So the first thing we want to do is open up our ready scene in Mudbox. And the first thing we'll do here is we're going to export what's our base mesh into Maya. So I'm going to go over here to the top right under Object List, underneath Layers. And then this is kind of my model group. I forgot to name it, so it's PDisk1 right there. Hopefully you guys remembered to name yours. So if you see here, when the object is turned yellow, that means it's selected, and it's selected at the current subdivision. And you can see here that there's these different subdivision levels. So I have my first subdivision level, which is at 13,000, and that's what I'm going to export back into Maya. And then I've subdivided a bunch of times all the way up to 3.5 million here to get as much detail as I possibly could. Mudbox can handle a lot of faces here, so 3 million is kind of a range where most pretty good computers can handle that. So what we need to do here is we're going to export the model at our lowest subdivision level, and then after that we're going to export some normal maps and some other kinds of maps to kind of transfer all this detail from this higher subdivision level onto that smaller mesh here. So I can tell that my highest subdivision level is currently selected because it's yellow here when I have select the highest subdivision level. If I select one of these other subdivision levels, you'll see it'll deselect. So that's a good way to tell what subdivision level you're currently on in Mudbox. So the first thing I need to do is let's see here, step the level down to the lowest subdivision level. So you can do that by going to Mesh, Step Level Down, or you can press Page Down to do that. So it's Page Up, Page Down. On a laptop, if you don't have that Page Up, Page Down button, it's Function. On a Mac, that's in the bottom left. So Function, and then arrow up, arrow down. So press Function here since I'm on a laptop, and press the arrow down to bring the subdivision level down to 13,000 there. And so we can tell that it's at that 0 subdivision level because now if I click on it there, it'll turn yellow. So all we're going to do now is a real simple step. So we're just going to select that here. We're in the object list. I'm going to go to File, and then Send to Maya. So File, Send to Maya. Send selected as a new scene. I want to start a new scene with this thing. So this window will come up. I usually just move past it without messing with it. Interesting. Okay, I haven't gotten that error message before, and I've done this demo twice today, so that's fun. Let's just see if we're able to move past it. We are. So I've kind of found that as with that specific example that just happened then, and then with some with a lot of students here earlier today in the demos, that some error messages would pop up, but usually if you power through it, it seems to be most of the time okay. So this model looks fine. So we have our model here, and the first thing I want to do is I want to create a ground plane to just kind of put this thing on, and I'm just going to demonstrate soft selection real quick to kind of create a ground plane, because but I don't want to go too far into it. I'll upload a soft selection demo that's specific to soft selection. So if I'm doing the soft selection here in a second, and you're like, whoa, hold up, you know, there's I have a demo made, and I'm going to upload it here that just purely goes over that tool here. So for this, I'm just going to create like a pretty basic small area here that I want this to be on. And then I'm going to subdivide this twice. For this specific example, I'm just going to create, it's basically just going to be a black plain floor for this thing to go on, just because the way I'm going to present this specific example is I'm just like presenting my model here. Some of you hopefully will try to kind of create more of like a scene for your model. It's up to you here. So if you want to do more than what I'm going to do for this ground plane, I highly encourage it here. So I'm just going to smooth it twice, and also just I don't want to get bogged down too much in that, because I just want to be sure to concentrate here and show you what you need to know for this tutorial for getting that detailed model into Maya here. So I'm going to use the soft selection tool, which you get by double clicking up here. And again, there's going to be a whole demo going over that in more detail. And I'm just going to model my floor just to kind of correlate a little bit more with the roots of my model, because when this kind of organic model is intersecting just a completely flat floor, it's pretty jarring. So just visually. The soft selection tool is just very helpful in a lot of ways. If you want to model, for instance, some water for a still image, you know, rather than animation, this can be a super helpful tool for just kind of getting a water plane easily. What I'm trying to emulate here is just something close to ground here, so that these roots intersect the plane in a way that makes visual sense. And so again, there will be a detailed tutorial on the soft selection tool, but essentially what you can tell here is instead of just grabbing one vertice at a time, it grabs a range of vertices within this zone here. And so the fall off radius is the radius of that zone, and then essentially this shape right here is the curve in which the area is affected. And so if we look at it from the side view, we can see we have this gradual curve here. Oops. Oh, definitely don't want to do that. Okay. If we look at it from the side here, when I pull up just one vertice, you'll see that the shape from the side here is the shape of this curve just going on both sides here. So however you draw this curve is the way this is going to look from the center over to the right there. Okay, so that's good enough for this demo. If this was like a finished project for myself, I would definitely go into more detail than this, but I just, yeah, can't abide that. I need this to be a little bit better, even for a demo. Okay. All right, so we've got our model and just kind of our plane here for presenting it. The first thing, I kind of want to start the lighting process here before bringing over my maps. And so what I'm going to do here is I am just going to go into the hypershade by clicking this button right here. Looks like a little olive. And under Arnold, go to, within the hypershade, in the bottom left, this is where we choose our new materials and new objects to add into the hypershade. This window up here are shaders that are currently already in the scene. You can see there's also tabs up here for lights and cameras and things like that. And so once we add lights, they'll show up here. Over here is our property editors, which we're going to be using a lot here today. And then this is the window where the nodes will show up. And again, that's something else that will be shown a lot today. And then up here in the top right is kind of a preview of what your material looks like. So by default, Maya creates a Lambert in the scene, which is just a matte finish, pretty boring, kind of gray shader. So we want to go to Arnold, Shader, click on Shader, and then we're going to go down to AI Standard Surface. So it's kind of, you know, maybe 2/3 of the way down. So AI Standard Surface, it's got an A above the circle there, and it's kind of a light gray. So I'll click that once, and then I'll click it again. So you can see up here, I created it twice. And I'm just going to press this button to clear these nodes out of the way here. So this is the clear button. It doesn't delete anything, it just moves it out of the way. Just to make sure that that's not visually distracting there. So I'm going to name one of these to be the cyc and one of them to be the tree. So you rename these by just right clicking and then going down to this bottom box right here to rename. And I'll name this one tree. And then I'll name this one ground. And then the way that we assign these shaders onto the objects, we can do it one of two ways. So for the tree, I'll do it the first way, and then for the ground, I'll demonstrate the second way. So the first way is just hold down your middle mouse button over the shader. This plus sign should show up. And then just holding down the middle mouse button, I'll drag it onto the object and then let go. And you'll see that it got applied to the object there. So just middle mouse button, hold it, drag it, and then let go on top of the object. The second way, and you can do this for, this is a way you can add the same shader to multiple objects at the same time, is I can just select this ground plane, then I'll go up to ground, and then I'll hold down right click, and then go to the top here to assign material to selection. So now we just have both of those standard AI standard shaders just on each object properly named. And so now let's just start by creating a basic light here. So I would recommend in your source images within your project, if I can pull this up. So this is my project folder right here. And so under source images, you can see I've done this demonstration a couple times. So there's a bunch of, it's pretty crowded in there. But we have the HDRI images. And so you can find these HDRI images on the D2L. There's a small library available for you all. You can also find your own online, and an EXR or HDR image file is kind of what you want. And so you can kind of choose your own environment that you want the scene to be in. So we're going to be navigating to these, and just make sure to load your HDRIs into your source images folder in your project folder. So if I open Maya back up again, we're going to create a sky dome light with the HDRI image onto it. So go up to Arnold, Lights, then the second one down, Sky Dome Light. So Arnold, Lights, Sky Dome Light. I'm going to click on that, and then this gray sphere is going to show up. And so if we render this image now, this this model would be lit evenly from every direction by a gray light. So just imagine that for a moment. And so what we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to project one of those HDRI images onto the sphere. So on the attribute editor, so I have the sky dome selected. On the attribute editor, over here to the right, we should be on the second tab right here that says AI Sky Dome Light Shape 1 with that A right there. And so next to color, we're going to go over to this checkerboard box. And so the checkerboard box always means in my, if you click on it, it means you're choosing to attach some kind of file in place of using the slider or the color here. So we want to use a picture of an HDRI image in place of just kind of choosing a plain color. So we'll press that. This window will come up. We'll go to the fourth down where it says File, and it has the mountainscape with the sun pictured on there. So we're going to choose File. And so you'll see here that this scene now just kind of turns dark gray. Not much has changed yet. And then we'll just look over here to the right, and next to image name there's a folder, and so we'll click on this folder to attach an image into the onto the object here. So under source images, if I go to HDRI, and for this I'm going to use the sunset. For my demo, don't feel like you have to use that. Feel free to choose whatever you want. And so looking here, we have the sunset projected. I am going to rotate this a little bit. And this is going to rotate the sky dome, because I just want that sun facing my object a little bit more, because I'm kind of considering this the front of the object here. So, and I kind of plan on my key light kind of coming from that direction, so that's okay. All right, and so now when I render the scene, we're just going to have like our basic lights going here. So I'm just going to save real quick. And so if I go to Arnold and then open Arnold render view, we'll get this. I'm going to make sure that perspective is chosen there, and I'm going to press the play button to start the render. I'm just going to think about that for a moment. You can see the progress bar right there. And so one thing I'm going to do as this progresses is I'm going to press this to take snapshots as we move along. So looking at this, let me just reposition my camera some. And I'll let this render just for a moment so we can kind of see our base setting here. Excuse me, just one moment. The sun is pouring into my room right now. It's making it hard to see my screen. So, just gonna do that real quick. Okay, I can see my computer again. That's our initial image right there. One thing too that's going to be helpful, I'm going to show 2 quick tips on the Arnold renderer that will be helpful here. So the first thing is the sky dome light. I don't really want that visible in my renders. If you want to put kind of a photoshopped image or something like that in the background, I think it's best for your final render. I would recommend doing that composite in Photoshop after the fact. These HDRI images aren't really meant to be making it to the final render, so an easy way to fix that is just with the sky dome selected right here, just under the attribute editor, we'll just scroll down to the visibility here. And then with camera, I'm just going to move the visibility down to 0. And this HDRI image is going to continue to project onto the model, but it won't show up in our render view anymore. So that'll just kind of no longer be a distraction here. So I'll just take a snapshot of this, and you'll see the snapshot will appear down here, and I'll toggle out of that and that snapshot will be saved in the bottom. And additionally, one other thing I want to show so the second helpful tip I want to show here is that you notice that I'm having to kind of navigate the perspective view, and then the render shows up here. But let's just say all you want to do is look through the perspective view and navigate that way. If you just go to Window, and I'm in the Arnold render view, go to Window, 3D Manipulation. Oh, whoops. Kind of snap the image to the bottom there. Let's see if I can do this without that happening. Oh, that's fun. So my render view is snapping it to the bottom left for some reason. Mine just always has to throw some kind of curveball at you. But you'll see here that I'm moving my scene only using the render view. So this can just be helpful if you just kind of want to, if you're getting tired of toggling back and forth between those. Oops. Okay. And I'm going to just disable that option since Maya's not cooperating with me on that. So, just going to save the scene. So we have our model imported, we have a ground plane, we have our HDRI image, and we can see here the mesh is about this dense. So I have 13,000 polygons here. I think this is about the density you want to shoot for with your model. If your lowest subdivision level in Mudbox is not dense enough, you could import a denser subdivision level into Maya to project onto here. So that is an option, but in this instance, this looks good. Oops, my sun veil fell over there. Just one quick moment as I set that back up. Okay, so Mudbox. Gonna move back to Mudbox, and we're gonna export our first map, which is the normal map, which will get all the detail back from the model, our Mudbox model, onto this Maya model. So moving over to Mudbox, going to over here, and I'm just gonna press mesh and go step level up. So we can do that by pressing page up or function the arrow key as well. So I'll just press function arrow key or page up a bunch of times till we move up to the highest subdivision level, and I can tell it's the highest subdivision level because I press on my highest level there and it turns yellow. Then when I click off, it turns off. And so from here, I am going to go to layers, and I'm going to turn off my, so we're in the paint layer over here, the paint tab. I'm just going to turn that off so that I can see my sculpt layers here. And one thing to keep in mind is that you see how I'm just going to break down what I have here. So I have in my sculpt, oops, I have my main model right here. So this is kind of the unaffected model. And then I did my first pass of sculpting, and I called it the height layer because I was kind of using my height maps to kind of add that level of detail onto the model. And then I did a bump pass, which was a more fine detail on it. So press there. And that looks extreme right now, but just keep in mind that this is going to be bark, and so kind of an extreme setting is what we're going to want. So I set the bump to 130, so we're not limited to 0 to 100. We can type in 500 here, and it'll go to, you know, an extreme setting if you want. So I went over 100 to 130 there for the bump. And then at the top here, I have a separate layer, a bump layer for my top oops, for the top of the model. If I just click there, you can see it kind of come on and off. And so working in layers like this is really helpful because we're going to send this model back to Maya, and a lot of the times you'll see that you'll just be happy to have things on layers here. Because for instance, when I sculpted this, I thought I wanted my bump map to be much more subtle than this because it kind of looks unpleasant in this camera view, right? But then when I brought it into Maya, I realized pretty quickly that I needed a pretty extreme bump setting in terms of that kind of layer of sculpting right there. So just having things on layers here can be really helpful. So just kind of describing what I had done there. So I'm going to go to object list. Oh, and before I show this, I just want to say one thing, which is these lighting presets are kind of helpful in that they show you different kind of lighting schemes for your model. And it can just help you figure out when we light things in Maya and the next step, what looks best, you know? So I'm just going to choose some of these different settings here. So I can see here that just generally speaking, my model seems to look best with kind of the key light coming from the right side and not too far above the object, right? And that looks better than like an underlighting scene like this, like a Frankenstein underlight kind of look. Doesn't look great on my model. And so this is just a good way to kind of preview some different light setups to see like quickly like what kind of lighting setup is going to work on your model before you bring it into Maya and start experimenting with things. So anyway, I find that to be helpful for this stage right here. So so now we're going to export all this detail onto our model in Maya. So I'm going to select level 4 here. So my highest subdivision level, which hopefully we're all on right now because we want to export out of our highest subdivision level to get all that detail. And now I'm going to go up to UVs and maps, go down to extract texture maps, and then down one more to the very bottom to new operation. So UVs and maps down to the very bottom, extract texture maps, and then in that submenu, go all the way down again to a new operation. And this window will come up that says extract texture maps. What we want is a normal map. So I'll click on this, and the second I click on that, it's going to change to a new menu. So I'll click on normal map. This will come up. And so we'll see here, there's only a couple things we need to change in here. But we'll see here that we have the target model, and that's just Maya's way of saying that that's our simple model that's kind of awaiting us in Maya that doesn't have a lot of geometry. Then we have the quote-unquote source model, which is our highly detailed model right here. And then this is a picture of what a normal map looks like. And so if you look at a normal map, it's kind of blue and purple and turquoise. And this map kind of shows the computer what's high and what's low on the mesh. So if you look at this model right here, like those wrinkles there, it's kind of giving that wrinkle information. And one reason that I'm kind of pointing this out right now is that just take note that this normal map is pretty colorful here. And so it's going to be really important to choose the correct color space, because if the colors are even a little bit wrong, it's going to kind of mess with Maya and the settings will be all wonky here. So I'll explain that step down the road. So just don't worry and follow along here. So we have, just moving along, we have our target model. So hopefully by default, it should say level 0. And then our source model, right? So we got our target model and then our source model. So the target model should be level 0. Then our source model should be level 4 or whatever your highest subdivision level is. And if these are blank, just go over here and select the like level 0. Just click on level 0 right there and do add selected right there. And then if this is blank, just go over here to level whatever your highest subdivision level is, and then just press add selected right there. And then hopefully it'll get to looking like this. So the method we're going to use, subdivision is good, so default. And under image properties, this is the first thing that we're actually going to change here, is we're going to go to 4096 by 4096. You can experiment with anti-aliasing here. I'm going to leave it off for now. It kind of depends what you want right there. But that's something worth experimenting with, but it's getting pretty into the details there. If you do use it, I would recommend 2x. Compatibility, Maya software, coordinate space, tangent. So make a mental note of this. Tangent space is kind of the space that we're working in, not object or world space, so tangent space. But so tangent is the default, so that's good. So far, all I've changed so far is I've just changed this to image size 4096 by 4096, and that's it. And then the second thing I'm going to change is texture map's good here. We don't want ptext for this. I can go into ptext later in the course, but texture is what we want for this workflow. And so here's what we're going to change is we're going to change the file type. So the default is a PNG 8-bit. And so this is actually really important right here. For the other maps, this doesn't matter as much, but it's really important for the normal map. The normal map is kind of the trickiest of all the maps of the 3 maps we're going to be doing today. So if you get through this one, you're golden here. So it's really important to change it from PNG 8-bit RGBA down to this, where my cursor is, to TIFF 16-bit floating point RGBA. So we're going to change it to TIFF 16-bit floating point, so not integer, but floating point. And I'm going to go to my source images folder. I'm going to make a new subfolder in here. Should have been doing that all along. So an online demo, and I'm going to name this and I like to, when I'm doing these, do normal map or whatever map you're making, and do version 1, 2, 3, 4 as you work. And so that way you can kind of differentiate. I would highly recommend doing that instead of naming it like normal map final, normal map. No, really, this is the final. Like that can get really confusing. So this version 1, 2, 3, 4 is kind of what I recommend here. So I'm going to save that. And so here the window disappeared. So if that happens to you, don't panic. It's just for some reason it kind of just shows up behind here. So yeah, if this window disappears, it's probably just underneath Mudbox. That kind of happens sometimes. So that's all done. So again, just to recap, all I did was 4096 and then changed it to that very specific file type of the TIFF 16-bit floating point. And then, so here I'm going to press extract, and then it's just, Maya's going to need to think about this for a second because it's taking all of this kind of complex, all these 3 million polygons here and transferring them onto a normal map. And in the meantime, as that's kind of going, I'm just going to get Photoshop opened here. Oh, that's quicker than normal. Okay, so the extraction the extraction finished successfully there. So hopefully you get that message. And we'll just need Photoshop later, so don't worry about Photoshop for now. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to apply this normal map onto this model here. So we're going to go to the hypershade. Oops. We're going to go to the hypershade, and I'm just going to clear my graph because this is actually our sky dome light. So this is the main shader for the sky dome. That is the file, that sunset image that we attached to the sky dome. So I'm just going to clear this out of the way. Again, this clear button does not delete anything. It just moves it out of your way. So I'm going to press tree here, and I'm going to get started on the shading network by pressing this double play button that's right where my cursor is. So I'll press that. And so the first thing we're going to do is apply this normal map, and it's really important to do the normal map first before you do these other maps because it's just, how do I say this? It's hard to see what the normal map is doing if any other maps are on there. And it's a really important map to kind of get right, and it's the one that usually takes the most tweaks in order to kind of get it right. So we're starting with the most difficult one, and then it's going to get easier from here. So with this main shader selected, I'm going to look over here to the right on the property editors, and then I'm just going to scroll down past base, specular, and all these things down to geometry. And then under geometry, next to bump mapping, so normal mapping is kind of like a more complex form of bump mapping. We're gonna, or more advanced, I wouldn't say more complicated, just more advanced. Press that checkerboard button to the right of bump mapping. This will come up, press file, and you'll see here that it created these 3 new nodes here that are connecting into the normal camera node. So hopefully your graph looks something like this. And so there's just a few changes we need to make. And so this is really important to follow along. This is kind of that area where we just need to get every step right. And it's not too hard if you follow these steps. So the first thing is we're going to go to this bump 2D1 node right here that's directly to the left of the main node. And right here, it says bump. And we're going to change that to tangent space normals. Remember how that was tangent space normals was selected in Mudbox. For this, 1 is usually a pretty good bump depth to kind of start with, but tree bark is pretty extreme. And so I'm going to change this up to like 4 to kind of start off with for the bump depth. So that's going to be some pretty steep bump mapping there, but that's what we want. I might even need to raise it higher eventually. So we did that. So we just changed it to tangent space normals, adjusted the bump depth to be a little bit higher to make sure we're able to see it. And interesting. So if you can find this tab right here, this is Arnold, this directly beneath it, turn off flip R, flip G right there. So turn those off if you see that. If you don't see that, don't worry, we'll get to it coming up here, but you'll just want to deselect that. I'll just go ahead and do it, but I'll show you where to find it elsewhere if you're unable to find it here. So so flip R, flip G, and under Arnold right here. It's really important to have those off. If those aren't off, the normal map will just appear inverted. So what's up is down and what's down is up, unless that's clicked off right there. So that's step 2. So again, under this node right here, we changed the bump depth up. We changed the tangent space, or sorry, we changed from bump to tangent space. And then if you click down under skip past effects and down to Arnold down here, make sure that R and G are off. So here, on this second node to the left, I'm just going to click this folder option right here next to image name, and we're just going to load our normal map. And so if I go to source images, then I made a online demo folder, chose that. So that added the image file into that node. And so this is super important right here. So under color space, for the normal map, this actually doesn't matter so much for the other maps. We just need to go down and find raw right here. On this particular computer, these color space options are all showing up as one window. On your computer, it might show up with a few folder options. And I believe under utilities, if you scroll to the right of utilities in this kind of similar folder, you'll be able to find raw. So just find the raw color space, which will be under the color space here. And now you can kind of see that get added onto there. So those are actually all the steps we need to do. So again, it's just we started on the main node here. We went down to geometry next to bump mapping. There used to be a checkerboard box here. We clicked that, and then it created this node structure, and we chose file, and then it created this node structure. Under bump 2D1, under 2D bump attributes, I changed it from bump to tangent space normals. I increased my bump depth just a little bit, and then scroll down to Arnold underneath effects and checked off flip R and flip G channel, and then went over to this node right here. Clicked on this folder to kind of attach our normal map, and then change the color, and it's really important to change the color space to raw right there. And then from there, you should be good to go. If you click on Arnold and like this isn't showing up, because that has happened to me before, we can get there another way. So if you don't see that flip R, flip G thing, I'll show you another way to get to it. So select your tree model and make sure that the tree model has that shader on it, right? And so here under the attribute editor, tree 1 is what I named my shader. So and you can see over here, I never named my model, which I should definitely do. So select your model, go over here to this third tab, which will be the shader, and then go down to the geometry tab. So on the geometry tab, and again, I selected the model, went to the attribute editor, went over to the shader, which is the far right tab, scrolled down to the geometry tab. Then next to bump mapping, you can see I attached a file here. So what we're gonna have to do is right click and then go to this first option that should say bump 2D1 out normal. So again, I just right click right there where it says bump mapping. And here we'll find that window, and then under Arnold, you have the flip R channel, flip B channel. So we just want it to look like that. If it's checked, uncheck that. So now those are all the steps that we need to apply the normal map. And so we'll do a render here in a moment. Notice that I moved the bump depth up a little bit. Before I render this, I just want to create a couple of area lights so that we're able to see this a little bit. If you don't create area lights and we're only using the HDRI light, that lighting is going to be a little bit soft. And so it'll be kind of hard to tell what the normal map is doing with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and start creating my lighting scheme here. And I'm going to do that with Arnold area lights. So I'm going to go to Arnold, Lights, Area Light, right above the Skydome light. So Arnold Lights, Area Light. It kind of appeared within the model. So if you press W, you'll be able to position it a little bit. And I kind of determined before, I think, that I want this light to be, it's actually pretty close to where I want it positioned. And remember that, so with Arnold lights, and particularly with these area lights, the intensity is set at 1 by default over here in the attribute editor over to the right. And we're going to need that to be much bigger. And how much bigger depends on the scale of your scene. So my scale is like pretty small. So I'm going to want this to be 3,000. If your scene is really big, you might need something like 15,000. And if your scene is very, very small, then you might need something more in the realm of 1,000. It just kind of depends on the scale of your scene, how intense you want this light to be. Because the light falls off the further it goes, right? So I'm going to create that light here. And when I'm lighting a scene, I always start with my key light or my main light. And I don't start off by creating 1,000 lights. I create one light, and then I get it perfect, or as good as I can, and then I'll start adding lights from there. That's my typical approach. So I'm going to go to Arnold, open Arnold render view. If it doesn't come up for you, right click on Maya. So that's a right click right on the Maya icon right here, and you can see the Arnold render view shows up there. And you see I got the thinking wheel here. So when I was thinking about it, because we changed a lot. And so you can see here that right away my normal map is looking pretty decent. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, and remember that I can press this, if this button right here is the resolution gate. And so if I click on that, notice it creates a gray box around everything, but you see that the frame in my perspective view is compositionally similar to the frame in my render view. So that can be helpful for just kind of seeing what's going on in the scene here. And so you can see here that I did a bump map value of 3, and that looks pretty good. It's we'll actually need this to be a little bit more extreme down the road, because this is kind of looking like skin texture a little bit, and bark, if or at least this kind of bark that I'm emulating here for this model is a little bit steeper than that. So I'm just going to go ahead in the hypershade. Oops. I'm just going to do a keep image here. I really like to take snapshots to kind of just see the progress here. And bring that back down. And so I'm now in my hypershade, and then I'm just going to increase the bump depth a little bit. So to do that, I'm just going to click on this this first node right here, connecting to the main shader right here. And you see here under bump value we have bump depth, and I'm gonna move this up to like I'm gonna go crazy here. I'm gonna try 11. And you can see here the model update, and see that still looks pretty good for this particular model. So you're just gonna have to feel that out depending on your model here. So I'll keep an image here. And so just looking at the progress so far, this was the model that we imported. And we had the HDRI image kind of going around it here, creating a kind of universal atmospheric lighting of a sunset in this particular image. Snapshot 2, I created my normal map, and I had a bump value of 3. And I have that area light kind of coming in on the side right there. And then for snapshot 3, it's pretty, oh man, that's really subtle. I guess from that distance, the bump value is kind of getting pushed up a bit there. So I'm gonna, since that normal map is kind of on and it seems to be working well on the first try here, and if your normal map is not looking good here, I would just pause the video and go back and make sure that you're following all those steps exactly down to the T. Because if you miss any one of those steps, whether it's turning the normal map into a raw image in the color space, or it's flipping those RNG or whatever it was, the RGB channels, any of those steps like that will come out a little wonky here. So that's my recommendation there. And I'm just gonna, using this, I'm just gonna begin to set up my 3-point lighting scheme. So this is gonna be my main light. It's gonna be doing most of my work here. Looking at this render here, the idea of a 3-point light is to kind of use 3 or so lights to light a model from different directions to help give it 3-dimensionality. So it's really helpful when you're kind of, especially if you spend a lot of time modeling something, you know, and you want to present it as best as you can to your audience. 3-point lighting can be a good option. Alternatively, a single light scheme can be good. You know, it's just, it tends to be a more dramatic option, but less volumetric. So more of a, it can tend to be more of a comic booky kind of look. So it's just, it depends on the style you're going for. For this, I want this to be as 3-dimensional as possible to kind of show off, you know, the work as best as I can here. So that's going to be my main light. I'm with the area light. The main things you want to worry about are the intensity. And then I'm keeping these area lights pretty small, but if you want a softer light, so I'm keeping them small because I want like a harder, more dark Tim Burton-y kind of look here. If you want a softer light or softer shadows, you just increase the scale of the light here. And if we look at the Arnold render view here, I need to get out of my snapshot mode. You can see here, you see how soft those shadows are in comparison here? And so that's a very good look too. It just depends on what you're going for. So this is an area light with that's scaled up to be large. Oops. It has those softer shadows. And then if you have an area light that's small, so I had that smaller area light, it's going to have those harder, kind of crisper shadows there. And so, yeah, it just kind of depends what you're going for. Both are good options. So I'm just going to edit undo on here to bring the light back to where it was. So that's one of the biggest decisions you can make in your lighting is just, do you want your lights to be large and kind of softer, or small and more severe? Then you have your light intensity and exposure. And down here, you just kind of continue to scroll down in the attribute editor with that area light. We can change the color of the light up here, or use color temperature down here, which is another way to change the color of the light in more of a photography majors terms. Photographers measure whether a light is hot or cool using the metric of Kelvin. And so that's kind of what this does. And again, for now, I'm just going to keep these white. I just want to, all I'm focusing on right now is just kind of getting these positioned the way I want them. And then the spread, if we bring this down, the light beam will become narrower. So I kind of tend to like it at 1 for most purposes. But if I were to just drag this down to be really a thin spread right here, if I look at my render view, you'll see here that the light beam becomes much more focused, right? Before it was lighting this whole area right here, and now with the spread down, it's just lighting that little narrow area where the light is just right where that light is pointing. And so if you're, if you think about it in film terms, it's like the barn doors on a light. So the barn door is on a light. So for film and stuff like that, lighters will put these little, they're called barn doors on the lights, and you see if you kind of fold them in so that they're on the light, you can kind of narrow the beam of the light to be much more focused. And so that's kind of what the spread is doing under this light option. So the spread can be really helpful here. You know, it just depends, again, kind of what you're going for. For me, for my main light, I want it kind of lighting up a larger area here. So I'm going to go back to the spread of 1. So that's my main light, or my key light, as they're called. I'm going to create another light here to fill in the shadows cast by that light. So in 3-point lighting terms, that's called the fill light. So I'm just going to go to, what am I doing? Arnold light, area light. And you know what I'm going to do? Instead of making a new light, I'm just going to duplicate this light. So I'm going to call this my key light. And I'm going to duplicate it, call this my fill light. And reposition. And so for this fill light, I kind of want it to be a mix between what's called a rim light and a fill light. And let's see how this looks. So that's okay. So I'm just going to move this backwards. So that's kind of what I was aiming for a little bit more. So what I'm just trying to do, and I'm just going to do a snapshot so we can see this with the that fill light, that second light, and without. So I'm just going to press that snapshot button. Oh, whoops, I think I just created like 3 snapshots. So if we look here, this was the model with just the main light. And this is it where I increase the scale of the light, so a larger light radius. I'm just going to delete that for now. And so this was our key light, or sorry, this was our key light right here. And then this render, I have the key light still, but I added that fill light to kind of start to fill in those shadows just a little bit and kind of create a little highlight going along that side. So that's 2 over 3 lights right there. And then the third light is going to be the rim light. So I'm just going to duplicate this again. Do a rim light, or I'm going to name it rim light. And what this is going to do, what this light is going to do is it's going to be directly behind the object and going to be facing the camera. from behind the object. And what it's going to do, the purpose of the rim light is to create a highlight along an edge that needs some more definition. So looking at these previous renders right here, this area is just a little like blah, you know, there's not much going on there. So I want to create a rim light kind of highlighting that outer edge. So I'm gonna get out a snapshot, and let's see if I can get this thing working. All right, so we can see here that rim light's starting to come in. Just need to, it might not show up at first, and what you need to do is, so it's angled up a little bit, and I need this angled down. So it's shining onto the object here. So we can kind of see, we're looking from the side here. I'm trying to create a little bit of light up here at the top, and then just a little bit of that, that rim area being defined. So I'm just kind of trying to define the top of the tree here with this light. And I'm taking a little bit of inspiration here from Spielberg on this lighting. He kind of does this kind of lighting a lot. Okay, so that's enough to kind of get started here. So we'll continue to adjust this. I'm going to give it a second here to render and catch up with me here. But I kind of created my basic 3-point lighting scheme here with my key light, my fill light, and then my rim light up here at the top. So just going to reposition this a little bit and let this render for a quick moment so we can kind of get a snapshot of our progress. So we kind of got our tree. So this is just the tree with a normal map. And so we only have 2 more maps to add, and these 2 more maps are going to go a lot quicker because they're just much easier. And so what we're going to do first is called the diffuse map, which is just a fancy word for the color map. And then later we're going to do the specular map. And so specularity is these white highlights right here that makes this object look like a little bit shiny, or maybe even like a little damp or something, is what specularity is. And so a specularity map is going to tell Maya where it wants those highlights to be and where it doesn't. So, but first we're going to do the color map, or the diffuse map here. And just looking through my snapshots, we started here, and we're just kind of making some progress as we move along, and we're kind of ended up here so far. So I'm going to save my scene, and now we're going to go back to Mudbox, and I'm going to go back up to my Layers tab, and so we're in the Sculpt tab right now, and I want to go over to the Paint tab, and I just want to be sure to turn on Diffuse, and I'm using all of these layers right here, so just to kind of show what I had done here for my diffuse map, and this lighting's not really helping show what I had done there. I guess that's a little better. So for my painting on this object, I worked in 3 different layers. I did, that looks crazy. So I did my diffuse layer, so my main layer, where I did that, did paint tools and did projection mapping of my photograph, or photographs of bark texture right there. And I just projected it all around pretty carefully, you know, to make sure that I try to get rid of any stretching or anything like that. Then I wanted this tree to look a little bit older, like this had been chopped down like a year or 2 ago. So I went ahead and painted the top up here, but then I did a different stencil up here, and I use this one, if you look where my cursor is right there, of some like chopped wood, which comes up pretty quickly in a Google search. And then if you see here, I put the opacity at 42%, so it's kind of blending with this layer right here. And I kind of did that on purpose because a lot of times if a tree gets cut down, the tree kind of, as it heals, or just kind of the natural kind of chemical process, the color of the chopped wood turns from that tan down to like this darker brown that the rest of it is. And then finally, I'm going to turn these off. And I did a paint layer here where I painted using the airbrush and the paintbrush down here to kind of just paint in some darker areas to kind of accentuate some certain parts of the mesh. And so if I turn off that paint layer, you can kind of see what it's doing to the tree trunk there. And let me just bring that down a little bit. Okay, so to export your colors, we're going to, with the model selected, so I need to go back to object list and make sure that my highest subdivision level is selected over there. Then that might not even be necessary, but it's a good habit to get into here. So select the object at its highest subdivision level under object list, right? Under that subdivision kind of layer right there. So that's highlighted yellow. Under layers, under diffuse, right where it says diffuse right there. So I'm not going to do this on any one of these specific layers. I'm going to do it for the whole group, and that's really important because otherwise if I do it just for one of these, it's just going to only export that layer that I have selected. So I want to do this to this whole group. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to go down to export channel merged. So that's down to export channel merged. So again, on diffuse, on diffuse, right click, export channel merged, and here I'm going to export this into my source images folder on my online demo. And you can export this. Let's not do what we did before with the floating point. I would recommend one of two options. The PNG 8-bit RGBA is okay. And then I believe the TIFF 16-bit integer RGBA will also be good. The 16-bit floating point actually gives me some trouble on this. So that was good for the normal map, but let's not use it for this. So I'm going to do the TIFF 16-bit integer RGBA this time. And I'm going to name this and name that version 1. That looks good. Oh, I left the JPEG extension at the end there. So make sure there's not an extension there. And that'll export, and you see my wheel going. This export goes much quicker because it's just not as difficult a computation for Maya to make. So we're going to go back to Maya now. Go to the hypershade. We got this node view. I'm gonna clear this out just to make this less confusing. And I'll press tree again. Press the double play button just to kind of bring back that node view. And here I'm going to select my main shader. I'm going to go up to the very top in the properties editor. So under base, that first kind of tab selection up here, we have weight, and we're going to go to color. And so next to color, there's this little checkerboard button. So we're going to add our file to the color. So checkerboard there, click the file button there, and you'll see here, it creates this stupid crisscross here. So I'm just going to move it so that it makes a little more sense in the node view. So we see here that we made this new file, and the out color is going into the base color of the tree. So right now it's set to black because there's no file there. So with this file node selected right here, we're just going to go over next to image name, the folder, and we're going to attach this new image that we made. So source images, going to navigate to tree diffuse 1 and attach the file. And sRGB color space should be okay here. I guess we'll see. So let's, with that done, we don't really need to change anything else, hopefully. Hopefully this will just kind of render out correctly. So this model is going to look a little weird when this renders. It's going to look like damp. And so, oops. and that's okay, because we just haven't done the specular step. And you can see here that the scene that I created was lighting the white model well, but now we have this kind of color map that's darker here. So I'm going to need to just make some adjustments to my lights and kind of boost them up a little bit. So I'm just going to try to make it so I can see everything here. Been working on a large computer all day, and so getting used to the small screen again. So I'm going to select my key light, which I named right over there. And so now in the attribute editor, next to the key light, we can change the intensity. And you can see here in Arnold, it's going to change in real time. So this adjustment is going to be pretty easy to make. And again, this thing looks super disturbing right now, but we're going to fix that. So the fill light, I'm going to increase the intensity there some. And I might need to add in a few more lights into this scene just to kind of continue to fill it out. I can also select my sky dome light, and I'm going to increase the intensity on that just a little bit, just to kind of fill in some of the kind of diffuse light. I'm going to do 1.4, and I am going to next, I'm just going to take my fill light, I'm going to duplicate it. I'm just going to call this extra light 1. So I recommend trying to do this in 3 lights if you can. I do a lot of lighting, so it's I can kind of start to get away with using a few extra lights sometimes. But if you haven't lit a whole lot in Maya and you just start creating 1,000 different lights, it's going to get really confusing really quick, especially if you don't name them as you go along. And I'm being pretty, it might not look like it, but I'm being pretty purposeful with the creation of each light here. So try to keep it to 3 if you can, and then if you kind of feel like you have the scene in control, at that point you can kind of start to add in some extra ones. Oops. Just gonna think about this for a sec. So I just take, for this light, I just want to light this, give this area just a little bit of definition, but also I kind of like some of the dark rim lighting that's happening in the scene. Oh no. Okay. So with this extra light, I'm just going to take the intensity down a little bit more. I don't want it doing too much. I just want it kind of giving a little bit more extra definition. Also, I don't really like how this ground plane is white there. It's kind of distracting since this is a dark image that I'm creating here. I'm kind of purposefully going dark with this thing. So I'm going to make that black, and so that's really easy to do. I'm just going to go to the hypershade, and I'm just going to select the ground plane up here, and with the color picker, just move that over to black. And so I just went up to base color and chose black. Otherwise, I feel like the default shader looks okay for this. And you see, that just kind of makes it a whole lot less distracting. The whole point of that ground plane is to make the scene less distracting here. So, so now we're making some progress here. This thing's lit up a little bit. I might want to continue to adjust these lights some, but before I do that, I want to change the specular map to make this thing look less nightmarish. So I'm going to just snapshot this thing if I can. So now if we just kind of tab through our progress now, we kind of went through here. And so this was our normal map. And now we've added our color map, or our diffuse map on there. And one thing with the diffuse map, just don't get confused when you're plugging in the hypershade. If you see here, I've seen some people plug it into the out color of the color map into like diffuse roughness and things like that, which makes sense because we've been calling it the diffuse map. But change it and make sure it's going into base color right there. Okay, so last step. We're going to do, I'm going to save. Going to go back to Mudbox and we're going to export our specular map. So Mudbox, I am going to just hide my color maps there. It doesn't matter. I can leave them on. Sorry, ignore me there. On the object list, I have the highest subdivision selected. And so we're going to do a similar export as we did with the normal map, just slightly different here. So with the highest subdivision selected on your object, so it turns yellow when the highest subdivision is selected, we're going to go to UVs and maps, extract texture maps down at the bottom, and then down to the bottom one more time to new operation. So UVs and maps, extract texture maps, and then new operation. Going to click that. So we're going to get the same window we got before. And instead of normal map, this time we're going to do displacement map. And so this is a little trick I do. This is the way I do it. So we're going to create a specular map by creating a displacement map. And I'll kind of demonstrate that. This will just need a quick change in Photoshop. So I clicked displacement map. Same thing as before with the normal map. So we have the target model and then the source model. So hopefully this should say level 0 right here, and then this should say whatever your highest subdivision level is here. If not, remember you can just click whichever the lowest subdivision here, and then click add selected there if this is showing up blank. And if this is showing up blank, you just go to your highest subdivision level here, and then press add selected there. This is good by default, subdivision is good. We're going to do 4096 by 4096 in terms of the image size. For this one, I'm specifically not going to do anti-aliasing because I kind of want this to be sharp. And so here we have texture, which is good. We're going to press this ... next to base file name. So again, the only thing I've changed right now so far is just the image size. So the file name, we're going to save it into our source images folder. The PNG 8-bit is okay. Also, the TIFF 16-bit integer RGBA will also be good. Do not do the floating point RGBA, which is, this is what we did for the normal map, was the floating point. But now that we're out of the normal map, the integer is better for what we're doing. So I'll do integer there. Or you could do a PNG. You can do that first option right there. It'll just be a slightly less resolution, but it'll be easier on your computer. So you can just kind of make that decision. And I'll name this Specular version 1, tree specular version 1. Press save. And so, oops. So that all looks good. So I'll just press extract. And this will take a minute. Might take 20 seconds to a minute and a half, somewhere in that range. Because again, a displacement map is actually similar to a normal map in Maya, where it's having to take all those millions of polygons and then compute and then transcribe it into a flat image. And so what we're doing here is we're going to take that displacement map, and that was done successfully. And we're going to open it into Photoshop, and we're going to make some alterations to it to help turn it into a specular map. And so I am going to go into source images, online demo, and then I'm going to find my specular map, which is that file right there. And I'm going to open it in Photoshop. And so I'm going to explain why I need to kind of make this shift from displacement to specular here. So a displacement map works like a bump map where a full gray value is neutral. So it means it's not going up or down. Then the further white it gets, the more raised the texture gets, and then the darker it gets, the further lower it gets. So if you think about a specular map, especially on a tree, we want the raised areas to have specularity, and we want the lower areas to not have specularity. And with a specular map, we just need more contrast here. And that's the only thing we need to change. Is this image looks perfect, we just need more contrast. So in order to get more contrast on this thing, and to get the highs to kind of raise off a little more, is I'm just going to press this little Ghostbusters button, this little circle and then the stripe in it. I'm going to add an adjustment layer. So I'll click there. And then the adjustment layer I'm going to do is I'm going to use levels as my tool. So again, adjustment layer and levels. And I like adjustment layers because you see here, it's a non-destructive way of working. I can adjust this image and it's a separate adjustment layer that's not going to destruct the image that we've created here. And so the way the levels tool works is you can see here, this is a little graph of the black to white area. So you can see this image is super gray right now. So because it's super gray, that little graph shows up as very gray. So moving this slider in like that is going to boost the darks. Moving this slider in and moving it in like that is going to boost the brights. So moving this middle mark will kind of further make adjustments here. And I like the levels tool because you can do a lot with it, and it's actually very simple to operate. So I'm just moving that dark slider in, and then I'm going to move the light slider in. And I'm just going for, I want contrast here. And I want the darks to be dark and the lights to be light here. And again, with this middle slider, you can see if I drag it to the left, everything, the mids get a little bit brighter. And then if I drag it to the right, the mids get darker. And I want the mids here to be dark. And so this looks pretty good for me. And so kind of zooming in here a little bit on my mesh, these areas that are light right here are going to have specularity, and then the areas that are dark is going to have specularity turned off. One reason that our render before looks all weird and gross is that it is specular all over. So it just looks like someone just gobbed it in, you know, water or goop or something like that. And so that's why it looks damp like that. And so with this map selected or added to it, it's just going to make that specularity a little more controlled here. And so I'm going to save this. I'm going to just save as. We could do the TIFF. Since I added, I'm just going to do a Photoshop layer here. So I'm just going to save this as a Photoshop image, I should say. So I'll name it Zero Tree Specular version 2. And I just changed the format to Photoshop here. Maya can read all these formats. So I'll press, okay, so our color profile is sRGB, so that's good. So I'll press OK here. It's going to save for a minute. And so now we're going to go back to Maya and we're going to apply that to our hypershade. So in Maya, I opened up my hypershade here, and I'm going to click on our main node right here, the big node. And under the base color, directly beneath it is specular. And so there's three main controls with specularity. We're going to plug this into the color here. So that's the color of the specularity. And so remember, black specular highlights just don't show up. So that's kind of why we did that black and white image like that. The weight is the intensity of the specularity. And then the roughness is the scale of the specularity. So if the roughness is small, the specular highlights will be sharp, like a piece of, like a mirror or piece of glass. And then if the roughness is set to high, it's going to be, the specularity is going to be more like a rough plastic or something like that. So those are our three adjustments we're going to worry about. So under color, next to color I should say, we'll click the checkerboard button and then choose file, just as we've been doing before. And again, why it keeps crisscrossing all these things. So I'm just going to move these nodes so that they're not crisscrossing and that this is laid out logically and not in a confusing manner for you all. So you can see here, specular color. We have the out color of our image plugging into there. So we're just going to click on this file node. We're going to go next to image name and click on the folder to import our image. So under source images, we're going to locate that specular image that we just made and attach it. And let's just go ahead and take a look at this before I start moving some sliders around, you know, with the weight and the roughness. I'm almost certainly going to want to move this weight down a little bit, but I just want to see what change that helped give the image. So again, Maya's just going to need to think about what's going on here. Interesting. So my render view wasn't updating. I just pressed stop and start, and hopefully that'll kick start it to get going again. And then so here I'm going to just see if I can get this working. I might close out the Arnold render view and just see if I click it here, if I can get it to go. There we go. Get it going again. Hopefully that didn't lose my snapshots. Cool. All right, so I still have my snapshots, and we can see here that the specularity is way more under control. And the weight is still at 100%, you know, so this is at 100% specularity, but you can see here that it doesn't look like as weird and damp as it did before. So I am going to go under the hypershade again, and I'm just going to move the weight down a bit because it still is, the weight of the specularity still was a bit much there. We don't want it to be too much or we'll lose our highlights though. And the roughness, I kind of want these to be sharp, sharp edges there. So now we're starting, the scene's starting to come together. And so these are all the steps that we need to kind of get those maps over here. And there's more maps and shader networks we can do here. But in my experience personally, I feel like these three maps are the ones that add the most to a scene. So we've got, obviously we have the color map, you know, so just the color of the image, that's obviously super important. Particularly with organic objects, the normal map is a little bit tricky, but the payoff is huge in terms of the detail that you can get transferred over there. So it's just the organic detail you can get there. And then the specularity is often a little underrated, but can help you kind of get that important parameter under control because it was a little out of control before. And so from here, all I'm going to do is adjust the lighting in my scene. I'm not sure if I like that area light anymore. So I'm just going to make some adjustments to my scene here. So to kind of get this to where I want it to be. So from here, I'm just working on adjusting these lights. I just boosted the exposure of my HDRI image to kind of give this a little bit more of an ambient light to help fill in the scene a little bit more. My rim light and my key light are looking a little too even there. So I'm going to adjust the angle of these things just a little bit You can see it's adjusting in real time, which is great. And I haven't adjusted the color of these lights yet either. So that's another important adjustment that is incoming. I press the plus button to kind of make, and the minus button to either make these controls bigger or smaller. So that's just kind of what I had just pressed there a moment ago. And from here, we're just fine tuning. The rim light, I often find it's helpful to kind of get it close to the object, so you kind of want it sometimes blowing out a certain area. Just want it spilling out a little bit further there. And so from here, yeah, I do still want this area kind of just lit a little bit more. So I'm just gonna create a light with the sole purpose of just lighting the small area to kind of just add a little more volume and definition there. So I'm going to snapshot this, and it's important to snapshot here because you can just kind of see, just help see like, am I making this better, you know, as I adjust it here. So this is the image before without the specular map on there. Looks really gross and weird. And so here, I might have taken a little bit too much specularity out of it. It just depends what you're going for here. But you see the specularity is way more pleasing to look at here. And we still have those specular highlights, but it's just where the object is raised here. And so this is the stage where we're just going to kind of continue to adjust the lights and fine tune here. So I just duplicated my fill light in this particular instance. And I'm going to remove my resolution gauge so I can just see my scene a little better. And I'm keeping all my lights small because I just want to keep these kind of hard shadows here for this particular scene. I'm just kind of into that for this scene, but a lot of you might want to scale these up a little bit larger than what I'm doing, or a lot larger than what I'm doing. It kind of depends. So let's look at this render view. Move away from our snapshot just to see what's being added with this light. So that light's a little intense still. And you see the slider here, so, or this progress bar. So I'm just going to let this kind of make a bit more progress. Okay. And this is something, yeah, this is the light that's kind of giving me the most trouble right now. I might need to change the angle of it. I definitely want to take the spread and, you know, narrow those barn doors. If you know what I mean, because I just don't want it affecting too much of my scene right here. I just really want it in on that area right there. And I might change the angle of it some to this. And so as I work, you know, so right now I have the sky dome light, and now I have 4 lights in the scene. And you don't want to have, the more lights you add, the more cumbersome your renders are going to become, you know? So just kind of keep that in mind as you work. So that's pretty interesting. So that's it when I have that light off. That's it with it on. So we're just kind of continuing to make small adjustments here. And small adjustments make just a really big difference, I find, as we move along. And one thing too is don't commit too much to an HDRI image if you start with it and it's not looking the way you want. Like the HDRI image makes just a massive difference in the way your scene is going to light. See, this HDRI image that I'm using here is a very dim image here, so it's just only giving me a little bit of light in the scene. but that's what I want, you know, in this particular instance. Because again, I'm kind of just going for something a little gothic. So it's updating as it thinks about that scene a little bit. And I'm just going to continue to kind of make small adjustments here. So that's that fill light, or that extra light that I just created there that showed up in our node network. So that's what that is. And I'm going to increase, I kind of want some more bump value, believe it or not. And with the specularity, I'm going to go to my main node, and I just want a little more specularity added back into the scene. So I'm just doing the weight, which is the amount of specularity, and just boosting that back up some, and letting this progress bar do its work. Kind of want that rim light to light more of the tree, or sorry, that fill light. So you can scale it like vertically too, if you want. Actually, I want to give my key light some barn doors here. You know what? That looks pretty good. So it's so I'm just gonna stage this perspective view a little bit and get our model in frame. Give my computer a moment to render here. And so next up, the next demo here is I'm going to show you all how to kind of boost your render settings to kind of get the most out of this render here. So this is what I have. And so I'll show you how to kind of just go into the Arnold render and show you what settings to adjust to kind of increase the quality of certain parameters that you want. And so again, just to toggle through our work here today on this demo. I know this demo is long, but I'll time code it here so everyone can see. So I have this is the initial model that was at the lowest subdivision level. This is where I created my normal map and put in my key light and continue to make adjustments. Here I created my fill light, so my secondary light, to help kind of complement my key light, my main light. Here I started to add in my rim light. And so we have the normal maps and our lighting setup, or our basic lighting setup. So here I added the color map onto the object. And this is where I added the specularity map to kind of get that specularity under control here. And here is where I adjusted the specularity a little bit further and just kind of adjusted some of the settings. I created another area light right here and to kind of fill in that area some, and then added in some scale to that light and made some further adjustments here. So if we were to export this image right now, you know, that's not a very high-res image, and so this is going to look just 1,000 times better once we kind of boost our settings here. That's obviously an exaggeration. A lot better when we boost up the render settings here. So that'll be the next thing, and yeah, the next step will be exporting this for final render.